This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
We also welcome our returning celebrity guest, host and creator of the One Track Mind podcast and Reels of Justice. You will remember him from his previous appearance with us on the Life of Brian episode. It's Ryan Luis Rodriguez.
Thank you, senoras and senors.
Welcome back.
Thank you for having me. This is a blast, yeah.
So what have you kept up to since the last time we saw you?
Watching far too many movies and sleeping far too less.
Fair enough. I mean, coming off Oscar season, a lot of us are probably contented out.
It's actually the first year since they started doing 10 nominees that I saw all 10 before the ceremony. So I could be mad about 8 of them. Turns out I wasn't mad at all, but I could have been. That's the key.
Fair enough. All right, so for tonight, for our 252nd episode, we discuss Erin Brockovich from 2000, directed by Steven Soderbergh, written by Susanna Grant, cinematography by Ed Lachman, music by Thomas Newman, starring Julia Roberts as the titular Erin Brockovich, Albert Finney as Edward L. Masry, Aaron Eckhart as George, Marge Helgenberger as Donna Jensen, Tracy Walter as Charles Embry, Peter Coyote as Kurt Potter, Cherry Jones as Pamela Duncan, and Conchata Farrell as Brenda. Background for the movie: Erin Brockovich was released on March 17th, 2000. That makes this week that this is coming out roughly the 25th anniversary. On a budget of $52 million, it would be a moderate hit, grossing over $256 million and finishing number 13 at the worldwide box office for 2000. The film received mostly positive reviews at the time, with a few notable standouts, but would go on to be nominated for 5 Oscars, including Best Picture, Director for Steven Soderbergh, Supporting Actor for Albert Finney, and Original Screenplay for Susanna Grant. The film would win Julia Roberts her only Oscar to date for Best Actress. The American Film Institute has recognized the film on the following lists: 100 Years, 100 Heroes and Villains, where Erin Brockovich was the number 31 hero. Also on AFI's 100 Years, 100 Cheers at number 73. Erin Brockovich currently holds an 85% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 73 score on Metacritic, and a 3.9 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So, as we do each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
That's a good question. I had to stop and think. I did not see this when it was released.
That is correct.
It was 2000 because that was about the time that I had 3 little children running around, and it was expensive to go out to the movies because you had to find a babysitter to take care of the 3 of you, and most of the time they only wanted to do it once or twice before they tore their hair out and stopped. So,
Dad, do you not remember?
What?
This is a very important movie that we did not see at the time.
I do not remember.
So Mom was gone with both of my sisters one weekend. It was just you and I because I had a football game for Pop Warner. And you had a choice. Take me to Erin Brockovich or take me to the whole 9 yards.
Okay.
Does that remind you of the story?
I do remember that now.
Yes, and you took me to the movie where I saw my first nudity on screen in Amanda Peet and got a lot of violence with Bruce Willis being a mobster. And then I revealed all of that to Mom's women's group at a luncheon like the following Monday. And you vowed never to go with me to another film as long as I was a minor. Or maybe longer.
Yeah.
Good times.
Throw me under the bus.
Yeah, I regularly do that.
I know.
So needless to say, I did not see this movie until I was on a plane 3 days ago.
Oh, really?
Nope, never saw it until now. Part of the reason of putting it on the list for this year.
I have seen the movie at least once, if not twice. I think Mom and I watched it a few years ago.
Interesting. Okay. Ryan, what is your relationship with this film?
This was a movie that I deeply, deeply, badly wanted to see when it came out, but was turned away by my parents because I was not allowed to watch anything rated R because I was, I was 14 at the time, and they were very strict about that rating. They were like the Gestapo for ratings. And I wasn't even aware of Steven Soderbergh at the time, and I want to say 2002, I bought Out of Sight and watched it and became his biggest fan in the world, and I started tracking down everything I possibly could. So I probably saw this around 2002 and loved it simply because it was a Soderbergh joint, even though it doesn't really feel like a Soderbergh movie per se, if that makes sense.
I think it does have a little bit of his general aesthetic to it. It's kind of a lot of handheld. It's meant to feel very small. It's tracking singular figures with big personalities. The musical choices are very influenced by him. And honestly, I don't really hear too much of that soundtrack in other films that are not associated with him. But yes, it is probably less stylistically Steven Soderbergh than obviously the Ocean's films or Out of Sight, and definitely Sex, Lies, and Videotape.
It's him saying, I'm never going to get a job directing another studio movie. I better do something safe and fine. And safe and fine to Steven Soderbergh is still out there on the edge.
I mean, it is exceptional. We haven't talked about it yet, and we will likely. This is the only time someone has been nominated twice in the same year for Best Director for two different films. Let alone when there were 5 Best Picture nominees, he had 2 of them.
Yeah, and took home a trophy for one of them.
Very much so, even if neither of his films did take home Best Picture in the year of Gladiator.
Ugh, don't remind me. Ugh.
A film we will be discussing, I believe, next month.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Can hardly wait.
So what is this movie about?
PG&E being a bunch of assholes.
I mean, there are much worse responses than that. In a way, this is the precursor of evil corporations running amok, and one person with a won't quit attitude who would not back down. I don't really remember a ton of movies prior to this where this was kind of the thing. Maybe The Verdict is the closest thing I can really recall, but there seemed to be a stream of these very similar to it. Maybe around, The Insider had come out the year before, which is Michael Mann. Yeah. So that's kind of got a very similar track where it's a major corporation or an industry hiding something. But I think this is about the time where we got a lot of these kinds of movies.
I'm trying to remember, what was it Meryl Streep that was, or was it Sally Field that? What's
Silkwood?
The name of Silkwood?
Yeah, that was Meryl Streep.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that was the first in
that
this
was 83.
line. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, doesn't it in some ways go back to like Silver Spring though? And even maybe further back as a literature analysis to like The Jungle by Upton Sinclair.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I do think that this isn't necessarily a new trope, but I was kind of surprised at how engaging the film was.
Yeah, it's a surprisingly kind of meat and potatoes version of Soderbergh. Like it's all about process. It's not really about being flashy or anything. It's just about a woman who has a specific job that she needs to get done and does not let anybody stand in her way. And then accordingly kind of changes the lives of the people around her. So in a way, she's the female Paddington.
Isn't it almost a situation of effort and drive overcomes the inadequacies of education and training? You know, it's kind of like, I don't need to be a paralegal. I don't need to have the college degree. I have the heart and drive that I'm going to make a difference and overcome my own weaknesses or inadequacies.
Well,
Absolutely.
you've often said when it comes to lawyers, the person who graduates first and the person who graduates last both have the same title by the end of it. But what separates often people in certain industries is intangible skills, the things that we notice as soft skills, your client care.
Yeah, there's a strong tendency, especially things like law, because lawyers either have a tendency to become over self-grandized or unable to relate to everyday people, whether it's because of where they started, they came from a family where there's lawyers, or their father or mother were lawyers, or because of affluence or such. And so they don't have the knack or the ability to relate to the everyday person. And sometimes you need these type of people who have that ability to break the legalese into language that's understandable to most people.
They need to schmooze.
Yeah.
So on that subject, why is law such a captivating film subject? We've discussed a lot of legal films over the course of the show, and we'll discuss a lot more yet. And what does it exactly say about us as a culture in the U.S. that we place so much importance on the value of law?
Well, I think we all want to see the bad guy get punished. And in that setting, it's a binary setting. Either they go free or they don't. And of course, the entire time the audience, with good intentions and nothing but affection in their heart, are rooting for the good guys. Although the bad guys occasionally win, in these movies and TV shows, they usually don't. And it's one of those things where you just want, as a viewer, you want that sense of closure, that something that terrible happened will not happen again, even though in reality, this is all a fictional concept. In reality, it will happen again, and they probably will get away with it. But there's something about the unreality of these Hollywood productions that kind of give you an excuse to believe that there is positive change made in the world.
It is certainly not lost on me that we are recording this on the exact same night as my torts midterm, and how unsatisfying the conclusion of many torts claims seems to be, that there's percentages to how at fault people are.
I just find it fascinating that people will love to watch legal dramas and they'll spend all these hours, and then how little esteem people have towards lawyers.
It is paradoxical.
Lawyers are somewhat shysters, though. And I apparently want to join their class.
Yeah, well, it's a matter of perception. I could probably, if I wanted to, make a lot more money than I do by doing something completely different than what I do. But it becomes a matter of what you want in life and how you want to present yourself. So there's variations. But I do pride myself in the fact that, as I've pointed out numerous times, there's two types of lawyers. Those that tell you what the law is, and those that tell you how to get around it. And I am the latter.
Well, you also pride yourself on being kind of a jag-off at times to other lawyers.
Because it's so much fun. Some lawyers are so uptight and they take themselves so seriously. It's fun to just stick a hot poker at them once in a while.
So on that note, Dad, do you have some additional background for us? Do you have our plot summary ready?
Oh, I do. Erin Brockovich is a biographical drama starring Julia Roberts as the titular character, a struggling single mother who stumbles upon a major environmental scandal. Working at a small law firm, Erin discovers that Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, has been contaminating the water supply of Hinkley, California, leading to severe health issues for its residents. Despite having no formal legal training, her relentless determination and personal connection to the victims drive her to build a case against the corporation. With her bold personality and refusal to back down, she helps secure a record-breaking $333 million settlement. Directed by Steven Soderbergh, is a compelling tale of persistence, justice, and the power of one person to make a difference.
Thank you. Did you know? Julia Roberts received an unprecedented salary for her lead role, making her the first woman to break the $20 million barrier. Did you know? Hinkley's toxins made the real Brockovich sick at one point. Steven Soderbergh filmed a scene set at the hospital, but later cut it from the final product. Quote, I didn't want people to think that this was going to turn into one of those movies where the protagonist gets terminally ill, he said on the DVD commentary. Quote, it was a tough call because Erin really did get sick and was hospitalized for a while. Did you know? After the success of the movie about herself, Erin Brockovich Ellis was the target of a blackmail attempt by her first husband, an old boyfriend, the George biker character in the movie, and their attorney, who threatened to smear her reputation as a parent. She called the police, who recorded the shakedown threats and arrested them. The attorney reportedly served time in prison as a result. And a reminder, lawyers are shysters. Did you know? Albert Finney initially turned down the film. Danny DeVito had to convince Finney's girlfriend to convince the actor to change his mind, offering to schedule all of the actor's scenes as Ed Masry closer together so he wouldn't have to be in Los Angeles as long as earlier scheduled. Did you know? This is the last of Steven Soderbergh's films to be shot by a cinematographer other than himself. In this case, the four-time nominated Edward Lockman, and twice over the last 2 years. He has shot all of his subsequent films and TV productions using the pseudonym Peter Andrews. And with that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 253rd episode, we welcome back Kieran B. of the Best Picture cast to discuss The Grapes of Wrath from 1940 for its 85th anniversary. Directed by John Ford, written by Nunnally Johnson, cinematography by Greg Tolan, music by Alfred Newman, starring Henry Fonda, John Carradine, Shirley Mills, and Jane Darwell. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Before we move too much farther, we have our guest on this evening, Ryan. Where can people find you, and what have you been up to?
I have been up to 2 podcasts, the first being One Track Mind, where every other week, myself and a guest analyze a film through its audio commentary, because we're trying to keep physical media alive, and we're trying to make sure that those bastards in Hollywood don't take away our DVDs. And I'm also doing Reels of Justice, a fake movie court wherein a prosecutor, defender, judge, and jury try to conclude whether or not a movie is guilty of being a bad movie. It's completely silly. It's completely fun. You can jump in at any time and enjoy it. Same with One Track Mind, actually. You can find on social media, you can find Reels of Justice at Reels of Justice everywhere except for Blue Sky, because our main producer, Rob, won't get off his ass and give us the Blue Sky account. And for One Track Mind, I'm on one, that is the numeral 1 Track Mind podcast on Instagram, on Blue Sky at onetrackmind.bsky.social, on Facebook, on Podchaser, and Patreon / One Track Mind podcast, where you can get over 300 hours of bonus content.
Excellent. Now, what I have to ask is, have you put the movie Simon Says to the Reels of Justice?
We have not.
Shucks. We just had to release an episode on what is a 0% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes and a 19% audience score episode because somebody lost an Oscars bet. And Dad, since we haven't talked about it in the main feed, who happened to win this year's Oscars bet?
Yeah, fuck you.
And what exactly are you going to have to cover?
St. Elmo's Fire.
Oh.
You mean the collection of the worst human beings on the face of the earth?
Yeah. I went and saw it in Madison when it was released. And with my friend Eric, who was up for the weekend. And we were talking about it because we both remember it and looking at each other going, what the fuck is this? We hate this. We almost walked out and we're like, I paid for this. I'm going to sit through it, even if it is abusive to do so.
And that will actually set a record. It will be 2 Joel Schumacher films on the bad movie bet.
Dana?
I guess I didn't realize he did that.
Yep.
You have my sympathy, sir. I'm sorry you're going to have to put up with that movie. The most insufferable cast of characters ever assembled for a motion picture.
Yeah, okay. You got it. Exactly. You wanted to just reach into the screen and choke these people.
Maybe I'll watch it with you just for the satisfaction. I've never
Trust
seen
me,
it, so
you won't get any satisfaction. There's no Schadenfreude here. You're going to be crying by the end of the movie, and it'll be because you had to watch it, not because it had an emotional impact.
Okay. It's the same principle of why I don't like the TV show Friends. It's a bunch of people who never grew up from high school. Only this is worse. This is them on without antidepressants.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I picked well. I was kind of hoping that I lost this year, but all right.
What would be the movie you had to watch if you lost?
Nicolas Cage's Left Behind.
St. Lasar is worse.
I mean, at least I would have had the pleasure of being able to make fun of Nick Cage the entire time.
Yeah, overacting.
Okay. Moving back to the regular show here. We left off at Best Performance. Dad, who did you have down?
Julia Roberts.
I did as well. Is it a clean sweep, Ryan?
I'm afraid not, sirs. Albert motherfucking Finney!
Okay.
He was my best secondary.
Mine also.
All right, so Dad, let's start with you then.
Well, it's her taking the character that she first had in Pretty Woman and just going a little more raw and over the top.
I suppose I hadn't really related the two. I guess I could see that. She's a lot more unfiltered in this movie. Whereas the other one, there's like an endearing quality. While she is a little bit brash, there's a genteel and gentle side of her in Pretty Woman. This, you're rooting for her, but you're like, why am I rooting for this woman who is just like so rude, obnoxious, and almost arrogant?
Yeah, well, she almost fits into a lot of the females in my family. Not my immediate family, my extended family.
Well, you got to be glad none of them listen to this show.
I'm sure they don't.
Just to clarify, because if at least one person on the Wolf side does listen to this program, I want to clarify for the audience out there, you mean the Duncans, correct?
Correct. She would be a perfect Duncan woman.
Fair. I don't know. I think the way she plays this is endearing in a way that I can't quite put my finger on. But the fact that it's with such gumption and tenacity and kind of audacity gets you kind of motivated to get behind her in the whole ordeal. And she seems to be on the right side of justice over this whole thing. So I think between the story and her personal success, it becomes the transformation of somebody who was, for all intents and purposes, and not looking to do a pun here, left behind, and turning it into gold. All right, Ryan, tell us why we're wrong, and it's actually Albert Finney.
I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. It's all a matter of perspective. I look at it as basically the relationship between Angie Dickinson and John Wayne in Rio Bravo, minus the sexual chemistry. It's one of those things where, like, you can see her physically make him flustered and get him upset, and then moments later he's like, you know what? I'm going to do exactly what you told me to do. It's one of those relationships where there's a pull, there's a give, and there's a take, but mostly there's a lot of taking. But Albert Finney, sometimes he looks absolutely delighted to be like, oh my God, I get to be corrupted by this woman? That's terrific. And then sometimes is just absolutely exasperated by her. And I literally love every single moment he's on screen.
I know my dad loves that comparison between the two movies, given that Rio Bravo is one of his personal favorites, probably in his top 5.
Masterpiece.
The one thing I will say that is interchangeable a little bit between the two, or that's a particular difference, is who is the more confident person in that relationship. Angie Dickinson is kind of playing a bit of a bubblehead, but that has the ability to kind of rope-a-dope John Wayne throughout the entire film. Whereas in this one, Erin is a much more confident figure, despite not being the lawyer. And so she keeps him on his toes, but she feels like she at all times is knowing what she's talking about. None more so than the scenes where she can tell you or recite everybody's names and individual phone numbers and details about their entire lives from memory.
It's a scene torn straight out of Rain Man, where he starts reading the phone book.
Exactly. I had Albert Finney as my secondary. I think he's extremely lovable. If he wasn't so good, I would have at least put him in charismatic, but there is a lot to like about him in here, where unlike a lot of lawyers who would basically dismiss everybody who did not immediately agree with their opinion and assessment, he at least is willing to listen and present some different options and opinions to somebody who is clearly more invested in this entire ordeal than he is. Mm-hmm. And I think that's somewhat a good quality to have, to be able to listen to people and meet them where they're at. Dad, who was your best secondary?
I had Albert Finney also. And actually, when I was doing the research today, I actually looked up a photo of him, and the real life attorney, Masri, looks like half the lawyers I've known in my life. He just kind of looks like this affable guy that kind of just gets by. And I have a feeling that's kind of what was going on. He was going to be a very comfortable lawyer who's just done enough in his life that he could have had just a comfortable life leading into retirement and not anything big. And she dragged him kicking and screaming into the big time. And Albert Finney just does a really nice job of portraying that. At one point, he's kind of a good lawyer, and he's kind of an aw shucks lawyer, and also understands that she's able to pull him into spheres that he had not contemplated.
Ryan, since you had Finney as your number one, who did you have as your number two?
Marg Helgenberger.
Interesting choice.
Absolutely outstanding in this film. Breaks my heart every single time when she runs out of the house and tells the kids not to be playing in the water after learning that the water is poison. Is probably one of the best character moments of Steven Soderbergh's entire career. It is so devastating and gutting. And then when she finally gets the settlement, the joy and the relief in her face is something that you just can't teach. It's just something that you either have or you don't, and she has it.
Most charismatic, I'm going to give it to Soderbergh. Again, while it's stripped back from a lot of the aesthetic that you can definitely tell what a Steven Soderbergh film is, there's still enough here. There's kind of a certain lens color that he uses in this that's
orange.
Kind of familiar.
Yeah, the orange filter.
And again, the musical choice, the way he kind of roughly shoots things, a lot of this is just endearing and makes you comfortable. And this is quite possibly the peak of his ability, his authority, because between these two movies, being the only director to be up for Best Director twice in the same year for two different films, and then following it up with Ocean's 11, which I think is his most commercially popular film, you could say within a 24-month period that this is the peak of where he was at.
At least in terms of financial receipts. I would say that he's grown creatively since then.
Ryan, who did you have as your most charismatic?
As most charismatic, I have the great Tracy Walter, character actor par excellence. Such a good actor that I didn't realize he was still alive until last night. He has appeared in Batman as Bob the Goon. He's appeared in The Transient and Repo Man. He's appeared in countless films, and he's the guy who shows up at the end and that Erin thinks is supposed to be skeezy, but then he reveals that he actually destroyed documents on behalf of PG&E. I love a good character actor, and Tracy Walter more than fits the bill.
Well, I have Cherry Jones simply because I like to name drop.
Oh, good God, you're going to do this again?
Because I actually met her. So therefore, I'll just do that. But no, I mean, I thought she came across as one of the more challenging characters in the film. I think her hard-boiled attitude kind of added an edge to the film that was missing.
Let's move to best scene then. I have 5 nominees, and I think you could probably add 3-4 others, definitely, or comfortably. I have the courtroom clash in the beginning. I have Erin sinks her teeth in, which I basically refer to as the montage where she disappears for a week. Then I have the clash with Potter, which between those 2 scenes, you're skipping a significant portion of the movie, but like I said, you can only get to 5. Then I have Embry, which we just mentioned here when Tracy Walter was nominated for Most Charismatic. And then finally, The Spoils, which I refer to as the final scene with Mark Helgenberger receiving the good news, more or less. So out of these, what did I miss?
The scene in which she comes home frantic, wondering where her children are, and then goes next door to find out the nice, affable biker is taking care of all of them. Not only that, he's doing a great job, and he's being a great surrogate father, even though he's just met this woman, and he's just met her kids. And in a different movie, that would go in a different way. And in a different movie, you would cast aspersions upon this man or cast suspicion upon him. And in this, he's just a good guy. That's all there is to him. There's no complexity there. He's just a good man.
Well, in the story of the movie, afterward, well...
Yeah. In the fiction of the film.
Yes.
Dad, anything to add?
No, actually not. I've thought about a couple of them, but I'm like, it really doesn't matter because I wasn't going to pick them anyway.
Okay, so then out of these 6, courtroom clash, Erin sinks her teeth in, George looks after her kids, clash with Potter, Charles Embry, and The Spoils, what is the best scene?
Erin sinks her teeth in. It's the most iconic moment of the entire film. It's what the film is basically based around, is whenever she gets the upper hand, whenever she gets the higher ground, that's what this movie is for. That's what that scene exploits and does so well with so little.
I'm going to go with the clash with Potter because I am my father's son. And to see anybody getting the better of a lawyer repeatedly is kind of fun.
Yeah.
Especially one who's like coming in as the savior, the white knight with all the resources and funding. And they're the one with the really classy suits. And then they realize, well, we don't know nearly as much about this case as this woman.
That's why it's my best scene. I just really enjoyed that portion of it, and the fact that she so dissed them to show that she knew more than they did and had some greater knowledge of what was going on than they did.
As far as favorite scene, I have The Spoils because the Erin Brockovich of our office has it correct that she loves giving congratulations calls and getting that fantastic feeling of changing someone's life, telling them that their circumstances are truly changed and this period of their life is over. They can start to move on.
And who is that?
Because that's what every lawyer is looking forward to at the end of each case.
And who is that?
Really? You have to ask? The dogged researcher who likes to pore over records, numerous to count, and reads for all intents and purposes well beyond what a normal lawyer would, so that she can really sink her teeth into a particular case, even when it's against all odds.
You use the term lawyer.
Did I?
Yes.
Well, I mean, she is a representative.
I know. Okay.
This is the one clip where she won't hear it, and this is probably the best time that I've complimented her on the history of the show.
Yeah.
For anyone who's still unsure of whom I'm referring, it is my mother, our most frequent guest. Anyway, moving on. Ryan, what's your favorite scene?
My favorite scene is the concluding Marg Helgenberger scene where she finds out that she's gotten such a sizable amount of the settlement.
Because okay, so you also have The Spoils.
Yeah, it's not flashy. It plays completely on faces, but not in close-up because this is not television. It plays all in medium shots, and it allows the audience to be swept up in the heroism that's there.
And Dad, your favorite scene?
I have The Spoils. And in part, it's not just the release of the information, but I would assume The Spoils also includes looking at the impact on the office and Erin's check, because ultimately, I mean, that's my philosophy of the office. I tell everybody, don't worry about the money. What you do is you do the job and you do the thing that you're supposed to do and you do it well, and then money comes. And that's what struck a chord to me. She was doing what she thought was right, and she ended up with the spoils from it.
Most indelible moment, I'm going to go with the clash with Potter again, because watching a lawyer get his comeuppance, and, well, actually multiple lawyers, is satisfying.
Yeah. Ryan?
You'll have to get back to me.
All right. Well, for me, it's Charles Emery, because as a lawyer, I've had those moments where something falls in your lap that just is like this ray of light coming from the sky, and it happens and you just go, oh my God, this is everything. Makes my case. And it is such a good feeling when you can take something and everything falls into place. It feels like you're playing a Stradivarius.
Ryan, did you get something?
Yes, I did. When Ed buys her the truck, one of those moments where she begins to feel like she's being taken advantage of because she's putting in more hours than anybody at the office. And then she gets that letter and the car keys, and she looks straight ahead of her and sees that truck and sees a form of financial independence that she didn't have before. She sees a personal autonomy that she didn't have before, that he is paying attention to what she's getting done, and that is not passing by unnoticed. And that is the most important thing in the world to anybody, really, should be at least, to be seen.
It's the sign of a good boss who takes care of their employees.
Yes.
All right, that looks like a good spot for our second break. We'll be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, and before we get to the Stanley Rubric in a minute, if you're ever curious about our master greatest movies of all time list that has every graded movie we've ever discussed on the show, there's a link in the episode description of every episode of this show, or you can go to RonnieDuncanStudios.com and find it as the top entry on the greatest movie of all time podcast show page. That has the grades we've done so far for all 227 movies we've graded, and we continue to add more each week. Make sure to check that out as we go and follow along. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. David Johansen, 75, American musician. New York Dolls, singer, hot, 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 and actor, Scrooged. The famous line that I always quote, "It's a bone."
I wondered if that was him, looking at the picture.
Michael Priest, 88, American director, The Prize Fighter, Dallas, Walker, Texas Ranger. Betsy Arakawa, 65, American pianist. And if you put your effort and concentration into playing to your potential to be the best that you can be, I don't care what the scoreboard says. At the end of the game, in my book, we're going to be winners.
You did the thing I was going to do.
It's with deep sadness. One of my all-time favorite actors. Passing of Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa. 95, American actor. The French Connection, Mississippi Burning, Unforgiven, Hoosiers, Superman. Oscar winner, 1972, 1993.
Yeah. What can you say that hasn't already been said? In some ways, it almost will start to feel disingenuous, but for a guy who is a very grumpy, known grump on set, he has so many films that people love and relate to. Hoosiers is an absolute favorite of mine. I know for some people, Royal Tenenbaums is like
that's for me.
Peak Gene Hackman. Yeah. Superman, for some people, they just cannot unsee Lex Luthor being Gene Hackman. He had a great run from about the early 90s to the early 2000s until Welcome to Mooseport.
What a way to go out.
But we keep saying on this program, and we were kind of in some ways wondering when he might go and when Jack might go. And we talked about this on our Oscars post-reaction show. Just this class of people from the 70s that were all part of maybe the actor studio, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, that in the near future will all pass. And how they'll all be equally remembered. Some of them have obviously been out of the public eye for a while. Jack has been retired since basically The Departed, with The Bucket List being the only other film I think that he had after that. And Gene Hackman obviously has been retired for 20 some years. But that doesn't make it any less profound for people that really appreciated their work. And it's, again, why we do this section of the show, to remember these people that we have such a close connection with through their artwork. There are not many professions that people have where when you leave behind some type of legacy, it's still there for people to appreciate and connect to. And this just happens to be one of them.
I know for myself, I've commented that people who impact you, even if it's not directly related to your life, that you absorb a certain portion of their being, their soul, into you. You know, there are certain people. Robin Williams for me, Bob Newhart, both have already gone. Carl Reiner, Mel Brooks is pushing 100. You know, you look at Dustin Hoffman, you look at Robert Duvall, you look at Jack Nicholson. I mean, I wish health and longevity on all of those that are still with us. But all of these people have so impacted my life, and I have absorbed so much. The Pythons, we've already lost Terry Moore. We've already lost Graham Chapman. Again, people that have just really impacted me. Losing Gene really was a sad moment for me because he was just such the quintessential actor.
And with that, we remember these here fondly for their contributions to the arts with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. All right, let's do the terrible transition as we do each week to best funniest lines. I'll start with Erin Brockovich. By the way, we had that water brought in specially for you folks. Came from a well in Hinkley.
Kurt Porter. How did you do this? Erin Brockovich. Well, seeing how as I have no brains or legal expertise, and Ed here was losing all faith in the system. Am I right? Ed. Yeah, completely. No faith. Erin. I just went out there and performed sexual favors, 634 blowjobs in 5 days. I'm really tired.
Erin Brockovich. They're called boobs, Ed.
Teresa Dallavalle. Okay, look, I think we got off on the wrong foot here. Erin Brockovich, that's all you got, lady. 2 wrong feet and fucking ugly shoes.
Donna Jensen, you're a lawyer? Erin, no. I hate lawyers. I only work for them.
I maxed out my quotes at 1.
Okay. Ed Masry. In a law firm, you may want to rethink your wardrobe a little. Erin Brockovich. Well, as long as I have 1 ass instead of 2, I'll wear what I like if that's all right with you. You might want to rethink those ties.
Erin, look, I don't know shit about shit, but I know right from wrong.
Erin Brockovich. For the first time in my life, I got people respecting me. Please don't ask me to give it up.
I'm out.
As am I.
All
right, let's head to the Stanley Rubric then. Legacy is up first. This is a measurement of the legacy of the film roughly 5 years after the film came out, so about 2005 to today. What is the legacy of this film? We split that 5 and 5 points between the industry and the general audience for a total of 10 points. Dad, would you like to go first or second?
I'll go first. In the industry, I gave it points up for Soderbergh because even though this was only one of 2 films that he did that year that were both nominated for Best Director, kind of gave him an opportunity to do more commercially successful films and to try to push a little bit. but I think it was more of cruise control after a while than anything. I think he ended up leaving film and doing television in part so that he had more ability to do more creative things. Julia Roberts, I looked at her filmography, and she did a ton of films between 90 and this and 2000 that were well received. She did the Oceans films, and really after that, she hasn't done a whole lot. I was kind of surprised at how little of quality she's done since. So I don't think the industry, and it got mixed reviews when it first came out, and I don't think the industry holds this in high esteem at this point in time. So I went with a 3 for legacy after the first 5 years. I think within the 5 years it was higher, but within that post 5, it's 3. The Public. I think for whatever reason, this is a film that has stayed with the public. I don't know if it rang truthfully with a lot of people, but it's a film that a lot of people have seen. We did the little informal poll within our office, and about 60% of the office staff had seen the film and probably more knew of it. And talking with other people outside of the office, there seems to be some sort of a connection people have had with this. So it's had a little bit more staying power. So I'm with a 4 for that, from 7 overall.
I'm not too terribly different from yourself. I think the only real difference I have is that I think it's hard to accurately measure where the industry is at on this one. It's on a couple of AFI lists, but it's not like it's a prominent inclusion among anything. It's a crowd-pleasing kind of movie. At least when you mention the name, people are familiar with it. So it has in some ways broken through. This was a movie that I think also continued a run of successful kind of muckraking, true-to-life legal stories in a way of people getting back at corporations, even in a fictitious sense, because you also have like movies like Runaway Jury, which is about the tobacco industry, if memory serves on that one. And you also have like Michael Clayton, that's fictitious, but kind of involving similar circumstances of a big corporation that's doing some shady shit. And I do think that kind of resonates with people overall. If you asked people, what did Julia Roberts win her Oscar for? I think most people in the general audience would be able to name this. And from an industry standpoint, that is a significant point. Now, even though Soderbergh did not win Best Director for this, he won it for Traffic. I think him having this as a staple of he's the only 2-time Best Director nominee in the same category in the same year is at least a significant point. So I only went up a half point, but I'm at a 3.5 and a 4 for a 7.5.
So for me, for industry, I'm going to go ahead and give this a 4.5 because it assured practically that Steven Soderbergh will be able to make whatever movie he wants for the rest of his life. Ever since Erin Brockovich, there's been only one movie that he wasn't allowed to make, and that was The Man from U.N.C.L.E. because they had budgeted issues. And he almost made Moneyball, but that's a completely separate issue that we don't need to discuss here. So in order to establish that he has a blank check for the rest of his life, it's this year, and this is the more financially successful of the two that year. If I were to look at its relationship to audiences, I would say it doesn't come up very often, but at the same time, really, what is the conversation that it's supposed to show up in? I mean, Erin Brockovich almost showed up in the Simpsons movie as herself, so that says something, but that was 7 years after Erin Brockovich. So who knows what would have happened if that actually went through. So I guess for audiences, I'm going to give it a 3.5, making for a nice 8.
And some great math for me, because that means it's a 7.5 average, and I didn't need to use the calculator.
Mm-hmm.
So I got that going for me, which is nice. All right. So let's move to impact and significance. This is a measure of the impact and significance among the initial 5 years after the film was released, so roughly about 2000 to 2005. What is the impact and significance of this movie? Again, as split between the industry and the audience at large. I'll start off here just for the sake of it. I think that while we had a decent legacy score on this one, it was obviously a more impactful movie in the moment. The Industry, while there were a few mixed reviews, some notable standouts, I think Roger Ebert gave this a particularly bad review. I don't think that for me stands in the way of how successful it was, how successful Steven Soderbergh was in this particular year, how successful the movie was in a box office sense, how successful the film translated to awards attention, particularly for Julia Roberts as her crowning achievement of what her career for the last 10 years prior had really been to this point. I have a 4.5 for The Industry, and I have a 4 for the audience for an 8.5. Ryan, let's go to you.
Impact and Legacy, let's see. I'm going to give that one a 3.5, simply because it exposed the evils and indignities of PG&E that would set up the next 20 some odd years. And having been living in Northern California for my entire life, I know what bastards PG&E are and the terrible things that they're up to. And if we can get the rest of the world, as they call them, the flyover states, in quotes, if we could get everybody aware that these giant industrial companies are doing nothing but harm to our planet and are getting away with it scot-free, I think this is a perfect example.
So is that 3.5 for the audience or the industry?
3.5 for the industry. For the audience, I'm going to give it a 3 because it was like turning on a light in someone's brain and them immediately going, oh, this is a problem. This is a problem I should fix, but I don't want to fix it right now because there's the original Housewives of Beverly Hills is on right now.
All right, so he has a 6.5. I have an 8.5, Dad. Where do you land?
I am at a 4.5 for the industry. The sheer number of nominations. And I gave it a 4. It finished high. What was it, 13th, I think, for that year?
Yeah.
So it's not overwhelming, but it was significant. And I think it had a nice run probably on HBO or something like that as well, and on cable. So I went with a 4, so I'm at 8.5 also.
So that is a 7.83 average between the three of us. There are those pesky decimals. Let's move to Novelty. This is a measure of the novelty of the film as told through the originality and the execution of the film. We split this category between 5 and 5 points for each of those two items, originality and execution, for a total of 10. I will lead off here again as well. On an original side, these true-to-life legal dramas I don't think are particularly novel. And given that even fictitious ones had kind of seeped in, I still think that this movie is playing in a familiar sandbox in some ways. I do think that the story overall is a little bit more nuanced because this is at kind of the front end of a lot of the major lawsuits against some of these large conglomerate corporations and their environmental practices and policies. So I gave it a 2 for the originality. But where I give this movie its points is in its execution. It's got great acting. It's well told. It's a fairly good film style. You don't have much to really comment that it's not telling a good story. And it is somewhat stylized. So I can definitely see both a Best Picture and Director nomination for this. Obviously, Julia Roberts winning her only Oscar to date. So I have a 4 on that end of it. I have a 6.
Can I go next?
Certainly.
For originality, I have a 4, simply because although it's a very familiar story, it's done in a rousing way that has not really been seen since like the 1970s with these kind of political upheaval films. And Soderbergh absolutely brings his A game, and he makes something that is understated and not sensationalistic out of something that could easily become the movie that you've seen a million times before. Execution is definitely, that's a 3.5, but that's only because his execution of Traffic is a 5, and it's hard to give a guy 2 5s in 1 year. So 3.5 and 3.5, so I'm at 7.
Okay. Go ahead, Dad.
Originality, I have a 2. Basically, everything you said, Tom, as far as, I mean, we listed some of the films, but it's a long story of muckraking and such. And the legal thriller is not that original. The execution was well done. Even Aaron Eckhart, I mean, his role was pretty good. So I'm at a 4 also, so I'm at a 6.5 for the same basic reasons you gave, Tom.
Where did you get the 0.5?
I guess I am at a 6. Excuse me. I misspoke.
It's all right. Occasionally, we all need help with the math. So that is a 6.33 average between the three of us. That brings us to classicness. This is the most hard to define category. It can be how well something is aged at any point in the movie, the storytelling, the subject matter, the acting, the inclusion of certain materials or not, the musical stylings, the humor. Anything can kind of go into this for or against. And the reason why we usually start at a baseline that's slightly higher than the average, or where the 5 would necessarily come in, is because it's usually easier to take away points than it is to give them. We've moved back on that stance a little bit over time. But Dad, this is usually your category to start off with. Why don't you lead here?
The character, the fact that this is a female-driven story, somebody who overcomes odds, lack of education, lack of skill, I think that it does resonate accordingly. There is, there's a few points, very minor, that I would detract from. The comments about her using her sexuality, there are boobs, that type of thing. But that's minimal. I'm going to go with a 7.5 for classicness. Giving a few points up from the norm. There's nothing here that's earth-shattering, nothing that's detracting, and it deserves some points up for the things that it does accomplish.
So a couple of key points that I'd like to make here. One, the after situation where she was kind of in an extortion scenario with George after the fact, not a great look for the film. 2, the fact that you got Aaron Eckhart as a white guy to play a Hispanic, essentially, biker, and change the character from one to the other. Probably also not a great look, but frankly, nobody's really going to dig that deep to figure out that George was actually Jorge. But anyway, where the film gets points up for me is it is significantly ahead of its time on water issues, environmental issues, corporate malfeasance. When the stuff started going down in Flint, Michigan, this was the thing that everybody started, oh, that's the Erin Brockovich kind of thing, right? That was their relationship point to talking about a major news story. And I give this up an additional point as well for some level of timelessness. It's getting to the point 25 years out that you can really start to think about it in that light. I would give that an additional couple of points up. So if we start at the 6, point off for the few things I mentioned at the front end, 2 points up for the other stuff that I just mentioned, puts me at a 7.
For me, this is the perfect movie to watch at 3 in the afternoon on TNT on a Saturday. Automatically, that gets a 6. But then I place it within the Soderbergh pantheon, and I place it within the Golden Globes chasing insider information, medical/industrial thriller, which amplifies it by at least 2 more points. So I'm going to go with my Letterboxd review of 4 stars and give it an 8.
Perfect. I love that for the math, because that's a 7.5 average between the three of us. All right, let's go to rewatchability then. I have a feeling our guest is going to give this pretty high, but Ryan, let's let you lead on rewatchability.
Is this out of 10?
Yes.
Yes.
This is absolutely an 8. It's one of those movies that I put on at least every 10 years, and I do not like rewatching. That sounds like a long gap between times, but I generally do not enjoy watching the same movie over and over and over again. So it's pleasant. It provides those Soderbergh vibes that I so deeply care for. So I'm going to go ahead and give it an 8 as well.
For me, this is the second time I've seen it. I'm not going to turn it off if it's on, or if somebody has an interest, or I make a suggestion of watching this film, I'll watch it. Am I going to go out of my way to watch it? Is it going to be something that I put on every year or two? No. So that's right down. I'm going to go with a 4.5.
For me, I've been trying to judge the rewatchability more on an objective scale. While this movie is over 2 hours, and some ways it's probably a little bit over long, there are some stretches in here that you could probably clip out a little bit for time. I don't think once you kind of get into the teeth of it, and yes, the preamble's like 20 minutes, and maybe some of that could have been cut up a little bit, but then you got to get a feel for why this woman is quite so desperate, and she acts like a dog with a bone, that she's just not going to give this up. Some of that has to come from the development in the early portion of the film, so I get that, but maybe skimp a minute or two here or there if you can. I just think for a 2 hour and I think 11-minute film, it could have probably gotten down to pretty close to 2 hours. There were just some scenes that were a little bit elongated, didn't necessarily need to be. So I wouldn't have given this the editing award that year either. But that being said, it flows pretty well. It's very stylized. It's an easy movie to root for because it is kind of good guys versus bad guys kind of situation. It presents the world in a very binary way, as Ryan mentioned very early on in the show. So I think that's probably worthy of a 7. So that gives us a 6.5 average between the three of us. For audience score on this one, we had an 87% for Google users and an 81% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us an 8.4. So to recap the categories, we had a 7.5 for legacy, a 7.83 for impact and significance, a 6.33 for novelty, a 7.5 for classicness, a 6.5 for rewatchability, and an 8.4 for audience score, giving us a final total of 44.06, and currently placing it on our list at number 155 between The Dark Knight Rises and Top Gun.
Oof. What? Talk about between a rock and a hard place. Oh my God.
As usual, if you have any comments on our scoring, any complaints, congratulations, anything at all, you can write us at greatestalltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. Find us on any of our socials at GMOT Podcast on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, or TikTok. Or you can find us at RonnieDuncanStudios.com/GMOT Podcast. All right. Remaining questions for this one. Why do employers penalize people for being out of the workforce for periods of time? I've never understood that.
Twofold. One, erosion of skills because they're out of the workforce. Two, are they out of the workforce because of a desire to not work? Because employers are hiring, after you go through the whole effort of training and getting people up and going, if they're going to leave because they really don't want to work, you have apprehensions accordingly.
I guess I've never perceived it that way, and I try to give everybody an equal footing based on their current skills, but fair enough. My other primary question that I had, bigger accomplishment, Julia Roberts sweeping the Critics' Choice, Golden Globes, BAFTA, SAG, and Oscars, or a dual nomination for Best Director for Steven Soderbergh?
Dual nomination.
Yeah, to be the only person to do the dual nomination, I think that's a bigger deal.
And win.
Well, when you're one of anything, that's the bigger thing, even though none of us had Soderbergh as our best performer.
I didn't realize we could give it to performer, but, it's all good. If I knew, I would have done it, but I didn't.
Fair enough. Any remaining questions for either of you? All right. Well, I want to thank our guest for being on with us. Ryan, it looks like you won't be back with us until the end of July when you're back to discuss The Night of the Hunter from 1955. But tell people again where you are and what you're doing.
You can find my work at Reels of Justice at Reels of Justice on everywhere but Blue Sky. One Track Mind at 1, that is the numeral 1 Track Mind podcast on Instagram. OneTrackMind.bsky.social on Blue Sky, Facebook, Podchaser, Patreon. Find me anywhere. I'm there. I'll talk to you. Even if you're lonely, I'll sit there and hold your hand and we'll talk.
Sounds good. And thank you again for being with us. As usual, all of our guest links will be available on the website page as well as in the show notes. Dad, any remaining thoughts for the week?
Not really. We did our Oscar show. That was fun. Post-Oscar show was fun. I wish I would have won, but...
well. I did so bad in my pool. I did so awful. The only thing I got was a Nora, except for every category except for the one I wanted to win the most didn't win.
You're a Borisov?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was the only one it missed. I thought he was great in that. Against some very heavy hitters in that category this year. That category is usually stacked, and while he was great, it was going to be difficult for him to, as a newcomer, try and top a few people with some bigger name recognition.
I'm anxious to see what he does next.
Probably Sean Baker's next movie.
Probably. That would be my guess.
Bigger role?
Yep. He tends to do that with, like, in Tangerine, he gave the cab driver a bigger role every single time he comes up in another movie. He had his biggest role in Anora.
That's fair. That is fair. All right. As for me, before I start the 1982 prep for Revisionist Almanac, I decided to finally get through the rest of the Quentin Tarantino library that I've been missing out on. I have 4 left that I have to do. And so I'm just going from roughly 2001, 2002, I think it is, up through where he's at now. Some of those are some particular favorites, but I also haven't seen Django in years, probably a good decade by this point. So going back, and 3 of the films are the ones to start with here. I'm about halfway through, maybe a little bit more than halfway through Kill Bill Volume 1, got Volume 2, then Death Proof, Inglourious Bastards, Django, Hateful Eight, which I've never seen. And then I'll finish up with one of my personal favorites, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood again. But it'll be fun to finally get through his entire library.
I will tell you that I did listen to Conan's podcast with QT as the guest. They are very close, by the way. He did not elaborate at all on what his next project is. And this was recorded just a few months ago.
I don't think he has one yet. I think because he's placed this specific thing on himself, he thinks he has to go out on the exact right note. And until he has the script, the thing that he wants to put his moniker on, that will be his sign off, I don't think he's going to do it. And so we may be waiting for quite a while.
He had one, but it imploded. He was going to do
He personally
the movie
pulled
critic.
the plug on it.
Yeah.
Because he started to have people lined up to start working on it. And then he's like,
playing
no, this isn't
actors from previous movies.
Right. And there was a rumor that I think it was going to star Tom Cruise, which would have been interesting.
It would have been back to his Paul Thomas Anderson phase.
Probably, yeah. But I mean, given what QT has done to kind of resurrect people's careers, at least in like serious movies, it's not that Tom Cruise has been a bad actor or that people don't know who he is, but he hasn't done anything that's non-Mission Impossible probably in well over a decade at this point, except for Top Gun. And I do think there is, now that Mission Impossible is kind of winding down and there's the rumors that his character is going to be killed in this next one, that he may want to start doing more serious work. He's going to do the new Ian 2 film, I believe. Maybe it's time that he does something like that. And if the role is right, finally win his Oscar that he desperately wanted for a good decade.
He lost for best hanging from an airplane.
Yeah, until there's best stuntman, I don't think Tom Cruise is going to win much of anything immediately, at least for doing the movies he's currently involved in. But, all right, I think that'll do it for us this week. Thank you for listening. I'll be all around in the dark. I'll be everywhere. Wherever you can look, wherever there's a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there. Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there. I'll be in the way guys yell when they're mad. I'll be in the way kids laugh when they're hungry and they know supper's ready. And when the people are eating the stuff they raise and living in the houses they build, I'll be there too. Next week, for our 253rd episode, we welcome Kieran B. of the Best Picture cast to discuss The Grapes of Wrath from 1940 for its 85th anniversary. Directed by John Ford, written by Nunnally Johnson. Cinematography by Greg Toland, music by Alfred Newman, starring Henry Fonda, John Carradine, Shirley Mills, and Jane Darwell. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at thenewRonnieDuncanStudios.com or at greatestaltimemopodcast@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GMOPodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our distributor is Captivate FM. Our technical provider is Riverside FM.